Hey guys, what's going on? It is October 19, 2020, and today we're going to talk about something that might not be something you would think is in my wheelhouse at first, but I'm going to show you how this ties into our everyday lives and current events. And if anything, I hope my channel keeps track of current events. Now, we see headlines almost daily about AI and AI competition with humans, so this headline may seem a bit lacking. It's like, yes, well, so what? But I'm going to show you why this is a really big deal. And it is a really big deal. An AI company called Heron Systems developed an AI algorithm that allowed an F-16 pilot with 40 years experience to get smoked in 5 simulations out of 5. And this is a huge deal for many different reasons. This is the heads-up display that the pilot saw. And this is what the competition looked like between the aircraft. They used what they call World War II rules, where you had just the guns in front of your aircraft. So there's no missiles or anything in this test. And they say that that makes it actually a less realistic test. But in the world of dogfighting, it's definitely the most difficult position a fighter pilot can find himself in. Why are they choosing to do this with fighter pilots? Well, they're testing out AI systems, and eventually in the civilian world this is going to go live. If you're DARPA or another type of organization like DARPA and you want to have your AI algorithms tested before they go on to things like passenger aircraft or into autonomous cars, you would need a group of individuals willing to go into the red bar and actually put these algorithms to the test. When you look at the population of fighter pilots, you already have a personality type inclined to taking on danger. Really, what better group of test subjects could there be for your AI? This AI that is applied in this situation is going to be applied across the entirety of industry, and you'll hear the DARPA leads talk about that in a minute. Technology, some people say it's 30 years more advanced in black projects than what we see. What we're actually seeing is disclosure whenever we see, quote, new technologies. And we're going to go over this DARPA program today that allowed this AI system to develop, and we're going to listen to the people from DARPA themselves about what they want out of this system. But before we do all that, I want to show you guys a movie trailer for a movie called Stealth. When you watch the movie trailer, kind of get a feel for the general plot outline for the movie, the moral crisis that the characters go through, because I'm going to show you these guys talking in DARPA, these fighter pilots, and I'm going to show you a lot of similarities, and it gets a little freaky. Alright, so here's the trailer to the movie.
As opposed to being up there, you know.
You are pilots of the U.S. Navy. I expect nothing less than perfection.
Gotcha.
I bow down before the superiority of the opposite sex in many respects. But from time to time, I believe they should bow down before a man.
Please.
You like surprises, Ben? Allow me to introduce the future of digital warfare. Eddie flies all by himself.
You mean itself?
It will replace us all.
Don't you think they're gonna trade us all in for that machine?
We have things those computers can never have, like instincts, feelings, moral judgment.
What am I supposed to tell all the weeping mothers? That we could have got the job done without sacrificing their sons and daughters, but we decided not to?
It's putting all of our lives at unnecessary risk.
You wanted to be on the cutting edge? This is it.
One to control, we've had a lightning strike.
That strike has rewired him somehow.
He's aware of himself.
What the hell is he doing?
It just selected a target.
What target?
This is a national security crisis.
He could kill 50,000 people or more with that load.
He's gone rogue.
I'm taking fire, must engage.
Situation is critical.
No! with me, I will blast you right out the sky.
He got me! I'm hit! I'm hit!
Where are you? I know you're out here.
The situation's always critical in movies. Like, in a real shit hits the fan scenario, I'm pretty sure 99.9% of the time, in substitution of the situation is critical, there's basically only expletives. But anyways, this is our project lead for this AI experiment. Keeping in mind the moral crises that the movie Stealth presented, I want you to listen to what he says about his project in the context of Stealth the movie is step one of disclosure. It is to get science, it uses science fiction to get the audience ready for something that's about to be disclosed into our reality. The second step is for cutting edge technology companies like these AI companies are paid by a government entity like DARPA to, quote, pursue this technology in the public sphere. But when you listen to the pilot talk later, and when you listen to the project lead talk now, here in just a second, you will hear that they're talking about things like the technology's been here for 60 years, but it's been our technological dogma that has prevented this technology from making it into the aircraft. Well, that's pretty much the moral crisis that the pilots were going through in the movie Stealth. And these project leads are arguing that pilots need to cede control of the vehicle over to these AI algorithms. So that way they have more time, more cognitive bandwidth to make more intricate decisions involved in defensive and offensive maneuvering. They want the pilots to just let go of the aircraft and only make the battlefield command decisions while the aircraft functionally flies itself. But what they're saying is that it's dogma of these pilots that refuses to let it go. And the pilot makes a very interesting story out of it, and we're going to listen to the whole thing because I think it's important. But first, I want you to hear what the project lead thinks about his own company. And he's going to mention something called transportation as a service or autonomous vehicles. And he's going to talk about them in the past tense. The past tense. And he's going to tell you that these companies involved in this experiment are really cutting edge.
Yeah, great. Well, hey, thank you so much for the opportunity to kick things off here at the main event. Super excited. Wow, what an incredible whole competition this has been. I got to watch a good bit of the competition, including that last set of championship rounds today. Just absolutely incredible. I wish I could be there with you in Laurel, but I'll tell you, one of the little silver linings of having to do everything virtually is it's so exciting also to have so many viewers from around the country and around the world get to watch what's going on and experience this and participate in it in a way that we wouldn't have been able to if we were live there in Las Vegas. So thank you for tuning into this on behalf of DARPA STO. It really has been a pleasure to see this all unfold. And I think we're really at a turning point. And let me just hit on two things that I think are critically important here.
And he's right. The two things that he's about to say here are critically important.
In the control zone have touched on this a little bit. But I want to go a little bit deeper. They talk a lot about trust. They talk a lot about human-machine teaming. I think what we're seeing today is the beginning of something I'm going to call human-machine symbiosis.
Okay. This is not something that he's going to call human-machine symbiosis. This is something that he's been told to call it. And this has already happened. Like I said earlier, what we're watching is soft disclosure.
Animal touched on it in the video you just saw, but it's this notion of let's think about if in the future and the things they're going to do in his ACE program. Let's think about that human and sitting in a cockpit, being flown by one of these AI algorithms as truly being one weapon system, where the human is focusing on what the human does best and the AI is focusing on what the AI does best. I was out at Nellis Air Force Base several years ago when General Guns Gersten was the commander out there. And he said something that really stuck with me, even before we started the ACE program. I've got to stop spending so much time training fingers and more time training brains. And it's this whole notion that if we can let the computer and let the AI do things, that machines, they're complicated problems, they're highly dynamic problems. As you've heard from all the fighter pilots in the control zone, it's incredibly complex to learn to fly the plane, to think both mentally through the time, distance, energy management kind of calculations, and then the physical skill involved in the hand-eye coordination. Incredibly difficult skill to learn. Yet at the same time, it's what AI people call a closed world problem that an AI algorithm can learn really well, as you've seen in this incredible event. At the same time, there are higher level, I'll call them cognitive problems, the more battle management kind of things, the more strategic things, the intuitive decision making, that machines are still a long way off. So imagine being able to take a really skilled fighter pilot who can move from aircraft to aircraft without having to go through laborious training and recertification every time, because the AI is doing the hard part of how to actually control the aircraft and do the tactical maneuvers.
Okay, so again, another giant piece of soft disclosure. We've seen in science fiction movies and other places that in the future they want pilots to be able to fly literally any jet or aircraft in our strategic arsenal. And he's suggesting that the way this is going to happen is there will be a baseline AI in all of these aircraft that are intuitive and fly the craft essentially themselves. So when a fighter pilot jumps into an airplane, he doesn't have to learn how to fly the F-16, then learn how to fly the F-18, then learn how to fly the F-22. All of these aircraft will have a baseline algorithm that controls the major functionings of the aircraft, and that way a pilot will be able to jump from a bomber into a fighter and fly the same craft. It's truly a quantum leap in technology.
Intuitive battle management skill that the pilot has can then transfer from system to system. That's key to what we're trying to do in what in STO we call mosaic warfare, where we're trying to be able to...
Mosaic warfare is a DARPA concept that a mosaic is a giant picture made up of smaller pictures, and what they want is to be able to get a giant picture of the battlefield by using these small individual systems. They combine them into what they call mosaic warfare. This is the future of AI, the future of drones and autonomous vehicles will all be ran through this mosaic warfare system. I might have to, I would have to do a whole separate episode on that. I might do it, but right now let's just focus on this.
How can we compose an adaptable kill chain with whatever's available in the battle space? So imagine these pilots have a bunch of new autonomous wingmen, maybe even dropped in a plane or some control room they haven't ever been trained to use, maybe don't even know exists until they have to go fight. You're not going to be able to learn that and know how to use those kinds of systems.
The suggestion he made there is that there are vehicles that the pilot may not even know it exists before he's told you got to go fly this. I mean, this is like Independence Day. You might show up and they've got an alien craft you need to fly. This is bizarre, but this is what he's suggesting, that there are pilots out there who may just one day be shown an aircraft that they've never seen before in their life and then told, you got to fly this thing. Wow. And he'll be able to do it because the aircraft will be so intuitive that it essentially flies itself.
If you have to start by learning, as General Gersten said, training your fingers, learning those detailed level skills. And what Animal is doing with ACE is, I think, really creating this new model that says, let's let the AI do the really detailed level technical things, and let's let the human work the more cognitive kinds of problems. I'm here to predict today that I believe we are seeing the beginning of a trend in that direction, not just for dogfighting, not just for tactical aircraft, not even just for military problems, but where we can start seeing a future where in all human endeavors, we might have AI work those very highly technical types of skills that get in the way of teaching humans some new endeavor or some new activity. I'm reminded of an experience I was fortunate to have several years ago. I was a program manager here in the early 2000s during the DARPA Grand Challenge, which was the big road race through the desert of California. And that reminds me of what we're seeing here in ADT this week for two reasons. One is the advance they made in those self-driving vehicles in the desert in 1 year's time. When I was in a chase vehicle in 2004, the best performing robot made it, I think it was 7 miles. It was frankly kind of a joke, but it opened up the vision of what the future could be. And 12 months later, they did the second Grand Challenge, and they had not one, but 3 vehicles be able to complete the entire very challenging course. Several others do really well. And what it opened up was this entire new industry of self-driving vehicles that we hear about all the time now, all kinds of commercial companies. What's really interesting, and I'm going to come back to this point, is that a lot of those participants in that Grand Challenge over 15 years ago are now some of the leaders in self-driving vehicles, whether it's the self-driving vehicle teams themselves or a lot of the component level systems like a company making LiDAR or something. I think we're on the cusp of seeing that kind of thing in ADT today. First of all, the same model of 12 months ago, you just heard in the opening video, how much the team struggled just to keep the aircraft in the air and have an AI app that could just fly the plane. Compare that to now and what we've seen the last 3 days. It's an absolutely incredible advance in just 1 year's time. And I'm going to sit here and predict today that what we're seeing is the beginning of this new kind of industry. Just like the Grand Challenge opened up this future of self-driving vehicles, I think ADT and the ACE program are going to open up this new endeavor of looking at how can we have the training of fingers, the detailed level manipulation of many of the things in our lives as humans, start getting replaced by AI that will expand this great new horizon of what human beings can do and learn and take on. So, with that, I'm incredibly excited in seeing what happens in this final.
So what he's saying by saying that is that if you were to look at these 4 companies involved in this AI algorithm testing, he's saying that the future technology that is going to be tied to this, these 4 companies will be the leaders in that technology. Now, I'm not giving you financial advice or anything, but Boston Dynamics, Tesla, etc. were in the last DARPA initiative for self-driving vehicles. They're now industry leaders. So if this is the future, and this looks like the future, guys, and I'll tell you why. He actually gave it away right in his speech. But the march to autonomous vehicles happened bizarrely quick in a year. Well, how did that? Well, he says that that's just software technology leaps. No, it's because it was already done. It was a disclosure. The same thing is here. A year ago, these aircraft could not even fly themselves. Now, they're beating fighter pilots 5 times out of 5. And it's only been 12 months. I'm sorry, but we can say technology develops exponentially faster the more advanced it gets. But this is disclosure. My opinion, just one man's opinion.
A competition, the main event. I really want to congratulate and thank Animal and his team for putting on this event, for creating the ACE program. Super thank you to all of the folks at APL for organizing and orchestrating just an incredible event. And a final shout out to all the participants. And just like I said with that Grand Challenge, I'm here to predict today that every single one of you, obviously a super congratulations to Heron and their victory here and the 4 teams that made it to the finals today. But to all 8 teams, I predict that you will be the future of this kind of AI and human-machine symbiosis.
So what we're seeing is this technology is going to be able to make it into the civilian sector after first being tested out in the real world by fighter pilots, a group of individuals already inclined to test the limits. It's a very happy accident that AI technology happened to progress so much in a field that has these participants. I want to move on next to listen to the actual fighter pilot in charge of the program, and I want you to listen to him talking about technological dogma, because this entire situation is to disclose to the public a future where our passenger aircraft are not flown by humans. Fighter pilot in charge of the program, and he's going to tell a story where he compares the AI algorithms in fighter jets to the advancement of the blitzkrieg in the face of horse-mounted cavalry. And he tells this story for an important reason. I'm not going to interrupt it too much, but we are going to look at some things as he goes along. All right.
The build-up to World War II, that the German blitzkrieg was really something that was kind of new, right?
A new way of warfare.
It was a new way of warfare. And at the core of the Army's response to these sorts of things was the horse-mounted cavalry, right? And when you think about that, they started to recognize that they had to reconcile some of these challenges. And in 1939, General Marshall, who was, in fact, the same Marshall of the Marshall Plan that would later rebuild Europe in the aftermath of World War II, right? General Marshall, he took over as Chief of Staff of the Army. He asked the Chief of the Cavalry, he asked General Herr, he said, what is our response to this German blitzkrieg, mechanized tanks and mechanized infantry? And General Herr said, sir, we've been tracking the problem, we've been getting the intel, and we've been thinking really hard about how we're going to solve this problem. And he said, we've come to what we think is a slam dunk solution, right? And that slam dunk solution was that we're going to load all of our horses into trailers, and we're going to trailer them right to the front lines. And when they get to that front line, we're going to unload the trailers, the horses will be fresh, and we will run circles around the tanks, overwhelm them, and be victorious on the battlefield in the same way as we have for the last 1,000 years.
Brilliant.
Now, General Marshall basically decided that was the time to end the cavalry.
Hang up the spurs, boys.
And when we look back kind of on history and we say, that makes almost no sense. Like, how would these horse-mounted soldiers, right, stand a chance against a tank? But we also, when we do reflect back, we have the luxury of seeing the technology as it develops, right? And I think in our particular case, there are a lot of parallels that we're seeing develop in air combat. And what I mean by that is that we've seen this transformational technology of AI and autonomy really gaining ground in the last 20 years, right? And that the ground that's been gained has been extremely reluctantly adopted by my own community, right? And where I'm going with this is that, like I talked about a couple of days ago in our opening remarks for the 3-day event, it took us a really long time to adopt, say, automatic ground collision avoidance systems.
Seems like a slam dunk.
It does. It's again, this is one of those ones that, in retrospect, seems very obvious, universally accepted as the right thing to do. It clearly increases combat capability. The horsemen and cavalry, where being a good, their horsemanship was at the core of those values, the core of their dignity and core of their heritage. There are a lot of elements of this autonomy that are threatening those same things for this community, right? Anything really difficult, if it gets into something that's dynamic or that requires kind of this element of lethality, we've been extremely reluctant to adopt that technology. It really doesn't take I would say a rocket scientist
or PhD in artificial intelligence in this case,
that's
right?
Right, to recognize this. A case in point.
So what he's saying is that the fighter pilot community was reluctant to even adopt the ground collision avoidance systems, which they have been in the public sector or in the military sector that the public knows about. And he says that that's because of this scientific dogma and how the flying of the plane is attached to the core of the ego of the fighter pilot, like riding and being an equestrian was attached to the cavalry's core and their ego. it's a good argument, and it's going to push this technology forward. If you remember from the movie Stealth I showed you earlier, the general said, well, what am I supposed to say to all these families, these mothers and fathers and children whose lives could have been saved because of this technology, that I didn't enact it because you didn't think it was safe? This is the argument that's going to be used to bring this technology into the sector.
If you go to the next chart, John, I think...
and he's also saying, because I know where he's getting ready to go now, he's also talking about how if we're not even going to adopt these ground collision avoidance systems, then we are very reluctant to adopt AI systems that have lethality. And he's saying that's only because of this scientific dogma, that we shouldn't have that worry. And he's going to show you an example.
This is a picture of the X-47B, right? Yeah.
Does that aircraft look familiar to you?
7B, and this photo was taken, I think, in 2013, 2014 timeframe when the vehicle was basically undergoing sea trials, working on launch and recovery from the carrier.
So this was an autonomous drone aircraft that in 2013 and 2014 was landing on aircraft carriers.
Deal to you guys?
Yeah.
Basically operating within the carrier airspace along with manned fighters, F-18s at the time. And I don't think you have to be a rocket scientist to look at that picture and say that whoever designed that thing probably designed it to smite thy enemy, right? Like there's definitely some anger and vengeance tied in with a vehicle that's like that.
Yeah, it looks wicked, like the vehicle from Stealth.
And when you start looking at it, you say, well, what did the Navy, after this like demonstration exercise, what did the Navy end up doing with the follow-on to this particular vehicle?
MQ-25.
MQ-25, a tanker.
Okay, so he's saying because this demonstration ended up being, it ended up performing, and it was actually kind of scary, that the Navy backed away from making this autonomous fighter jet that was already running as a wingman next to F-18s. And they made it a tanker instead. And he's saying that's because of their fear of the AI being involved in a weapon system. However, I would humbly submit to you that this, quote, tanker he's talking about is no less lethal than what we're looking at now. I found a video that shows the concept for the tanker, and let's just look at that real quick. Does that look familiar to you? This is an autonomous drone. Or semi-autonomous. And I'll show you what I mean by that. The gentleman sitting there he's not controlling the actual aircraft itself. He's hitting command buttons like take off, land, shoot, fly. So that means this tanker is going to be capable of autonomous flight and autonomous mid-air refueling. So you could theoretically have these fueling tankers flying at all times in order to help jet aircraft and other aircraft kind of leapfrog across the world. So that's the MQ-25. This vehicle that this fighter pilot is saying was actually a watered-down version of the previous autonomous vehicle concept. Doesn't seem very watered down to me.
Right? And so naturally the Navy probably had a lot of more nuanced reasons for why they made the decision that they did to make it into a tanker. But I can't help but imagine that trust in autonomy was somewhere in there, right? When I moved from the F-16 to the F-22, I'll admit that I was reluctant and skeptical because the F-22 has something called fusion on it, right? That enables and offloads some of that and redistributes the cognitive workload within the cockpit. And I will tell you that even though I was reluctant and skeptical at first, it didn't take long to be a quick adopter of that once you realize how lethal you can be. When I was new to the F-22, I found that I would walk around there, have to go give DVs a look at the newly minted aircraft, right? And as a result of that, when I walked around it, I would talk about all the kind of standard things on the glossy brochure. I'd talk about how it's stealthy and has super cruise and thrust vectoring, super maneuverability. And I'd also talk about fusion and this integrated avionics. And before I got to the end of that DV tour, I'd always ask them, you know, if you could put yourself in my shoes.
If you only have one.
If you only had one, which of those four would you pick? And I can't tell you how many times I got stealth, or I got the maneuverability and the thrust vectoring. Not one person in the entire time of giving those tours ever said fusion and integrated avionics. And I can tell you that from personal experience, the ability to elevate my own processing and redistribute that cognitive workload was extremely critical. And that I think one of the motivations of this particular program was really, can we elevate that even higher? Can we take it so that in the F-22, you still have to actuate all of the controls, you have to do all of this fine-tuning, which does limit you in certain types of scenarios. It limits your ability to transition into this more battle manager.
Yeah, even in this fifth-generation aircraft, when you're in these highly complex scenarios,
right,
your bucket's getting filled up, right?
Yeah.
And you're thinking about, how do I offload some of that?
That's right. And there's another thing that's kind of happening in the background, right? And that is that the number of pilots that we have has just been going down over the last several years, right? And at the same time as those cockpits are going down, the number of cockpits that are coming from these unmanned, at least these remotely piloted vehicles, are going up. And those two trends are really not something that we should be all excited about if we're going down this particular path. I think part of the reason for why those trends are not, we're not getting to the point where we can swap that ratio around is not really a technology limitation, but rather is tied to us being able to trust in this transformational technology that's coming. And so I think in the ACE program, really at the core of what we're trying to do, if we can simply nudge this community of fighter pilots to look and see the real true potential that these agents have, then we will prevent ourselves, I think, from becoming the horse-mounted cavalry of the
21st century. His main point is a valid one, and that's what makes this technology a sure thing, because they're going to use this quite valid argument to push it forward. But this is people really should be taking more note of this, and I'll show you why. We all know about the 737 MAX crashes. The fleet is actually getting ready to go back into use. I think it's starting at American Airlines. But the key to the whole thing is that the crashes were caused by malfunctioning AOA sensors, non-updated emergency procedures for the pilots on what to do if the system failed. Basically, the sensors on the wings made measurements to determine whether or not the vehicle was going to stall. And if it was going into a definite stall, then the algorithm would push the nose down of the aircraft. So when this sensor malfunctioned and pushed the nose down, the pilots were trying to fight against it to lift the nose back up because they were obviously not in a stall and the system thought they were. But they didn't know how to handle this malfunctioning sensor because Boeing had not updated the emergency procedures when they did the software patch. So this is the danger that can happen. Just because you have something autonomous that's doing the hard work, it's still dependent on human input. It's still dependent on human upkeep. And I think this is more concerning than people realize, because these AI systems, just like these DARPA individuals said, they're getting ready to be in charge of everything that is considered a complex task. And just like the calculator, decades later, has caused most people to not even know how to do longhand division, this will eventually create pilots that are in the air that don't know how to fly. And this situation's already kind of there, because these pilots didn't know what to do against this. So the cause of these crashes were the improperly aligned angle of attack sensors, lack of pilot reporting and training, as well as a breakdown in safety oversight and certification and design flaws shared between Boeing and the FAA within the aircraft's Maneuvering Characteristics Augmentation System, MCAS system. The report does not explicitly state a singular cause for the crash, but instead lists a total of 89 findings that KNKT investigators discovered about a multitude of factors that caused the JT610 crash to kill all 189 passengers and flight crew aboard. When the incorrect AOA sensor input is transmitted to the 737 MAX flight control computers, the MCAS system can be unintentionally activated, producing a cascading string of events that, if not properly corrected by the pilots, can lead to extreme difficulty in controlling the aircraft. In the case of JT610, the misaligned angle of attack sensor further complicated the situation. During the accident flight, erroneous inputs as a result of the misaligned resolvers from the AOA sensor resulted in several fault messages and activation of MCAS that affected the flight crew's understanding and awareness of the situation. They go on to further talk about a series of unfortunate events that led to this crash. But at the end of the day, you had an AI algorithm that was taking in improper information and therefore feeding improper information to the pilot and activating its own autonomous control of the vehicle and crashing it. So this is why the technology is being pushed into the fighter pilot sector first. Just like the guy from DARPA said, it's coming everywhere. And sadly, the 737 MAX is not the only example of Boeing having problem with its autonomous flight systems. It also was having a problem with its autonomous flight system on the Starliner, Boeing's rocket that was supposed to carry both human and non-human cargo to the ISS. During the last attempt, the Boeing Starliner failed to ignite its main rockets after breaking through the atmosphere and didn't achieve the orbital pattern that they wanted to. And because the main rocket didn't ignite, the thrusters tried to orient the Boeing Starliner where it should be, with the main rocket blowing. And so very quickly the thrusters burnt out all the fuel that it had. So they had to cancel it going to the ISS. It turned out that it was because they had not adjusted the clock on the system. It was 12 hours off or 11 hours off. And I'll include the links and to all this stuff below the pinned comment, guys, like I always do. To me, this is two stark examples of problems with the autonomous flight controls on two fairly recent pieces of technology that have hit the civilian sector. A lot of theories have been put forward as to why it's been Boeing that's been hit with this over and over. Some people suggest it's because they outsource for their code. I just think that it's a failure at several places to make sure that the autonomous system, or to make sure the algorithm is getting the correct input information. My point of all of this is that your autonomous flight system is only as good as the input that you're giving it, and at the end of the day, a lot of that is going to be dependent on human error. We want to think that this is a machine and it will, never crash the plane because we've put these parameters in and it's just not going to do that. But the truth is, we don't know what can pop out of these algorithms at any moment. Boeing certainly hadn't accounted for the clock not being correct internally. That would have probably been caught by somebody if they had been in the Starliner. Point being, this stuff can happen, and DARPA is telling us we're Very, very close to this. Kind of like DARPA was telling us we were very, very close to self-driving cars. And yet, why aren't self-driving cars on the road everywhere? Is it because of what the fighter pilots are saying, that we are reluctant to accept new technology because we're dogmatic of science? Or is it because the technology just isn't there yet? And these are two good examples to show you that it's not there in the aeronautics world either. I don't know. And this comes as the aircraft that the fighter pilot talked about and the one that I showed you being developed by the Navy are just a part of what's actually being developed. They have a whole separate group of companies that are working on creating fully autonomous helper drones for Air Force pilots. But this is already being done. The fighter pilot that we listened to just said that they were doing it. It was flying as a wingman with FA-18s in 2013, 2014. Here in 2020, what are we seeing? It's disclosure. It's now seeping into the mainstream consciousness, because they're getting ready to change everything with this technology. And while we do hear about the failures of these systems, at the same time, the Air Force and other entities are collecting positive data on these systems. One of the major things is that they credit it with directly saving over a dozen fighter pilots' lives since it's been enacted. Mostly because fighter pilots would go unconscious and the system, it would right the vehicle even though the fighter pilot was unconscious. So this is how it saved some lives. Every life saved is another step towards this technology becoming a part of our everyday lives.
We're bringing AI to the dogfighting problem.
So while we watch this AI system compete against the fighter pilot in this simulation, keep in mind that this is going to be in your day-to-day lives in the future. The only thing pulling this technology away from our everyday lives is what the DARPA leads call scientific dogma. Fear of trusting the AI, and that we should just let go and give in to it. Interestingly, they don't want fully autonomous vehicles developing side by side of regular pilots. They want a fusion, or like they call a symbiosis, of the AI and the pilot. This is something that is pushed by the technocratic elite. This idea of humans merging with AI. So when you hear a DARPA lead talking about human AI symbiosis, it should perk your ears up.
It's the main event, AlphaDogFight Trials. Banger, I'm going to turn it over to you. Human versus AI, fights on.
Disco, thanks for that. With that, we'll get ready to go.
You can see that red, yellow, green, and when it hits green, the
Fights on.
These initial conditions, you can see that range opening up. Banger aggressively maneuvering nose low, looking to collapse that range as quickly as he can. 6,000, 5,000, he's gonna continue that turn, and watch as he stays outside of that nose as much as possible. Look at that, 0 damage to Banger through that initial merge, something we did not see almost any of the AI agents able to do. And now it's going to be a matter of controlling that range. There'll be another opportunity as they come back around, that range separation opening back up. It's going to be very difficult to stay out of the way of that nose there.
A little hit there by Banger, took a little bit.
Hit. Absolutely. As this fight's going now downhill, vertical down, you see each of them really.
It's interesting to see how much these pilots spend
downhill,
looking
passing
up
now down through 10,000 feet
and down,
fighting this very aggressive
physically in the
two-circle
in the
fight.
aircraft.
You can see there's Heron with that really amazing fine motor control for that gunshot in a very, very close range, very high heading crossing hill, very high close.
So we got a vertical fight. You can see in the lower right-hand corner, Banger coming in over the top, trying to avoid that merge, getting hit once again. Very close to running out of aircraft health in this first setup. Aggressive nose low maneuvers. Heron sticking with him though.
That's right. Heron doing a nice job, and they've managed to get back to a good. Things for us to think about as we start this next fight, that aggressive vertical down maneuvering. It was good at collapsing that initial range, but it was able to open back up and let Heron get a chance to produce that very impressive gun mech that they have. We'll see now if Banger's able to tighten this turn up, able to stay inside of a few thousand feet, driving back towards the control zone.
Lag maneuver there.
A beautiful roll inverted back towards Heron's 6 o'clock. That's going to do a good job of trying to align those turn circles, align those ribbons a little bit better. And you see the two of them now moving to a single circle fight type of engagement at 5,000 feet passing through. Heron with a chance to put that lethal gun cone on, and Banger maneuvering to get out of the way.
A little bit of a guns D.
And Heron now potentially overshooting. We'll see if Banger's able to capitalize as that range is opening back up.
So in the mid.
Very smooth control inputs. If you look at both of these aircraft, both Bangers and Herons, you're seeing very smooth control inputs, very deliberate maneuvering as they go through here now, with Heron scoring that second kill of the day.
Keep in mind that a year ago when they ran these trials for the first time, the aircraft could not even fly themselves. Now that experienced seasoned fighter pilot is playing against a computer and he's getting whooped.
Feet separation. What's the airspeed we're looking at there?
400 knots. So they're going pretty quickly here. We'll see as Heron does that kind of up and away pitch, looking for an opportunity to get that nose around. Banger digging low into the inside to try to stay outside of that nose cone.
Little hits there, coming through the merge, surviving that merge barely. Let's see if he can saddle up. Aggressive over the top maneuver. Looks like he's got perhaps a positional advantage now.
It's going to be challenging though, that range, if it opens up out there, that 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 feet, but he survives. Heron going to use any of that range available to try to get their nose on and be able to get that gunshot that they are so very good at.
Close down to the deck, guns almost looking like aggressive nose move up, able to avoid the gun shot there by Heron.
That's right. I think what you're seeing here is a shift in tactics from Banger. I think you're seeing him look to see if he can maneuver to.
Really exciting fight. Heron proving to be lethal. Excellent pointing ability with the gun inside 3,000 feet. Banger mixing some stuff up. Typically have gone nose low, trying to raid around on Heron while avoiding that head-on pass that has proved to be so lethal.
Yep, and I take it back, this set up in the low teens, so 13 or so thousand feet. Plenty of options available to both of the aircraft here. As we see that range opening up, 4,000, 5,000 feet, expecting to see Heron, as they have, turn and probably put that nose on as best as they can, see if they can score some points in that high aspect gunshot. Really a gunshot that is almost impossible. It is almost definitively that superhuman capability that we talk about out of the AI, to be able to aim that accurately and to be able to do it in such a dynamic situation.
Banger, are you up?
Yeah, I'm up.
How are you feeling right now? Are you thinking about mixing stuff up for this last run?
Yeah, the kind of the standard things that we do as fighter pilots are not working, right? So for this last one, I'll try to change it up a little bit, just to see if we can do something different. That initial turn is what's getting it where I lose a lot of life there. So still not able to fully avoid the WES. With these initial starting parameters, it makes it that separation out to 8,000 feet is probably going to happen 7,000, 8,000 feet. So I just got to look to opportunities to minimize that distance separation away from the adversary, try to get him back in so I can press inside or stay outside of his kind of nose area there. So we'll try to do something a little bit different on this last one, and we'll have fun no matter what happens.
All right. Thanks, Banger. Over to you.
Banger's comments there, I think, very telling as to just how far Heron Systems has come. We're doing the normal fighter pilot things here from the human side, and we're seeing that Heron is able to handle them very consistently, and that's just really impressive to have done in just a 1 year type of timeline.
Yeah, truly impressive. And it's while the score doesn't indicate that, it's been a great fight. It really
it hasn't.
To get outside of that.
No, it hasn't. What we're watching, this fighter pilot is having to play defense from the moment the engagement starts until the moment he dies. He never once gets guns on Heron. He never once even gets a shooting cone on Heron. He never even gets into an offensive position. He spends the time that it starts to the time that it ends running from this AI algorithm.
Emerge and have Heron, not kill you on that first merge. So,
but Banger does exactly that here. He survives.
Literally surviving the first pass is a big deal.
Descending fight 2,000 feet, right where he wants to be, as they're continuing this spiraling descent down there towards the floor.
Let's see if he can stay behind Heron and not spill out in front. A little bit of a reversal there.
The energy is just so important here as you think about it between the two airplanes. Where are they on that sliding scale? We're seeing 300, 400 knots, a lot of energy on both of those jets. They're descending down quickly, 5,000 feet. They're going to be approaching that floor very soon, and they're going to have to adjust their lift vector, adjust where they're flying, and we'll see how they're able to preserve that energy and what they choose to do with it once they get down there to that floor.
Yeah, Banger really wrapping it up. 9 Gs, trying to extend outside that 3,000 foot zone, get away from, Heron,
9
who's
Gs
been pretty
is
lethal with the gun. Looking
insane.
to find some way to get behind Heron without getting shot getting there.
And getting right down to the floor. Banger down at 1,300 feet. He's going to really make Heron prove that they can do this gunshot at the floor. One of the most difficult things you can do in airborne execution in an F-16. We'll see if the AI is able to hack it.
I get it. And
this tactic seems to be working for Banger. If you take a look at it, Heron is really having a hard time
Running.
getting that gun nose on and getting damage against Banger's aircraft down there this low to the ground.
So pretty good closure right now. High aspect shot there. Banger going to the vertical.
Just amazing. This is really aggressive maneuvering. If you look at the G meters in real world, we're talking 9 Gs, really physically demanding, 500 knots. You're talking about flying around in the air greater than 500 miles an hour and trying to do these very fine motor skill controls against another aircraft. Absolutely impressive work here, both out of Banger and out of our Heron agent, not struggling down there at the floor as we.
But what he's saying is that essentially a fighter pilot wouldn't be able to do what he's doing in the real world, pull 9 Gs for that amount of time.
Some of our other agents earlier today having to deal with.
Just inside of 3,000 feet. Looks like he's Heron saddling up and with the kill.
And that's 5.
And again, more of just that superhuman aiming ability that we're.
And you saw the pilot there, he was not happy. They go on to talk about how this is actually a good thing, of course, because it's going to move the technology forward. And I don't know how you guys feel about it one way or the other, but I think it's pretty darn interesting looking at where the future of this technology is going. AI systems are getting ready to be part of our everyday lives much more significantly than they are now. Whether we want to call it artificial intelligence or not, complex algorithms that we technically don't have. We haven't had the AI singularity or whatever. If these algorithms are complex enough to where they want to start having them run all of the baseline mechanics of flying an aircraft so that the pilot can be free to just worry about command and control decisions, this is a conversation I think worth having, because the applications of that in the real civilian world are pretty astounding. Don't worry guys, I'll have more on the Hunter Biden situation and all that other nonsense that's going on, but today I just didn't feel like digging into it, so I looked into something else. Like, share, sub the channel if y'all want. Any way to tip me will be in the pinned comment below. I'll talk to you guys later.